Regan Deering, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. It's good to see you again. And last time you and I met, you were a candidate for Congress in the 13th District. You were the Republican nominee. Since then, you've been elected to the Mount Zion School Board, and now you're running for the Illinois House of Representatives in the 88th District for the election coming up in November of 2024. So tell me, why are you running now as state representative? What caused you to go back into the fray of being a candidate, which is not an easy thing to do?
Well, it's nice to see you, and I'm happy to be here this morning sharing a little bit about myself. I am someone that has engaged in politics my whole life, but mostly as a voter and someone that has been paying attention. And as of late, the way that our state and our country has seemed to travel off the path of what regular Americans want, I found myself compelled to get into the fight, like you say. I think that voters are tired of the disconnect and are looking for everyday Americans that have had some of their same shared experiences, some of their same lines of work, to be at the table and have a seat in making good policy and good legislation that's going to affect their everyday lives. I have three great kids. My husband and I are living and working and advocating for our community here in Decatur, and we know how important it is to have legislators that are fighting for us. We want to stay here. Illinois is a tremendous state. I'll never forget my dad sitting around the table with his four children and talking about how lucky he was to have had children that have left home and gone and experienced different parts of the country and then chosen to come back to Illinois. And that's what we're doing. And that's why I will continue to stay and lend my voice in places like the Capitol.
How old are your children now?
So we have an 18-year-old son. We just sent off to college this past weekend. A little bittersweet, but he is ready to spread his wings and take on that next chapter. And then here at home in our local public school, we have a junior daughter and an eighth grade daughter.
And I ask that not just so we know more about you, but you are a member of the Mount Zion School Board, as I mentioned earlier. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons I think you're making, and we'll talk more about this, but you're making education one of the big issues that you're concerned about and why you're running for the state house. And so you bring to the table not only being a member of a school board, but as a parent who wants to have their kids and all kids in America educated. But what are your concerns about education? Especially for the 88th district. And tell us that, but actually, if you can, I should have brought this up. Tell us, where is the 88th district? What areas does it encompass? So our listeners who might be from downstate or upstate kind of have an idea of what area of the state we're talking about.
Okay, well, a couple things in a different order, I guess. So the 88th House District, I live in Decatur, Illinois. So Macon County is sort of the southern edge of the 88th District. It travels over and takes in all of Piatt County, and then up towards Bloomington Normal, it takes in McLean County and a little tiny bit of DeWitt County. So a lot of rural, small towns and villages that encompass the 88th. So you are right. I did find myself elected to the Mount Zion School Board, having two daughters in public education. I've been a former teacher and owned a small business that was in the education space. And so I know how important it is to have high quality education for all of our students. And for me, over the last couple of years, I really fell into attending my school board meetings more regularly when it came to the COVID restrictions and the mandates. I feel so blessed that Mount Zion did a wonderful job of keeping our students in school. I did push back a little when we had the governor come down on his mandate of masks that second full school year. Our local elected officials had come up with a return to learn plan that included an optional masking policy. However, when the governor pushed back and made it mandatory that public schools and I believe all schools enforced masking throughout the school year, my school board held an emergency meeting, and we had a number of families that stood up and tried to be heard about keeping the policy as optional. However, our school board voted 6-1 to follow the mandate. And so I found myself advocating for my family and our medical decisions, and our ability to be free and go to school unhindered. I ended up joining hundreds of families across the state in a lawsuit against the governor and the State Board of Elections and the Illinois Health Department. And I really do think that parents want their voices to be heard, whether it's medical decisions, curriculum decisions, just their engagement in our public school buildings. So to me, joining the Mount Zion School Board was a logical step to know that I wanted to continue to advocate for our families and make sure that we are offering our students the best education possible, and continuing on that goal of becoming one of the greatest districts in the state.
We used to think of education as being kind of rudimentary and just reading, writing, and arithmetic, and just like it was when we grew up, but it's changed dramatically, in part because we have different groups trying to push a social agenda on the schools. And we hear this across the country. And here in Illinois, I thought about playing a clip for this interview in which Tony McCombie, who is now the leader of the House Republicans in the state legislature, but before she was the leader, there's a clip of her asking a question in House debate about a mandate for sexual education. And if I were to play that clip, it is so sexually charged that it might be a problem for us to re-air this interview. I mean, and yet this is what they're trying to teach. I know I'm being purposely vague here, but I can't say what the mandate is. That they would be, pushing very graphic sexual information onto
Content.
kids who are, in some cases, in kindergarten.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And, is that happening
issue
in Mount
was playing
Zion?
out.
And if that's an issue for you, why don't you discuss your thoughts on this?
Well, you're absolutely right. Our state legislature, in mandating sex education, is really taking away local control. That, I think, is the primary concern for so many with laws coming out of Illinois state legislature, is that they are oftentimes overarching and taking away local control. Our local school boards do have a right to opt in or out currently to the sex education standards that are being put down by the state legislature. And if I recall correctly, I think over 70% of school districts across the state had opted out. And I don't understand why the legislature, primarily Democratic controlled, isn't getting the message that our families and our administrators do not want inappropriate material being forced down our younger and younger students. Most parents feel that those are conversations that should be happening in the home. And while I do respect that we have for a long time had a health education and a sex education program in our school buildings, they were at certainly more age appropriate levels. So I know in my personal district, we have opted out, and I am thankful, but I'm mostly fearful for those very large urban school districts that are the ones that have opted in. When I ran for Congress in Illinois' 13th congressional district, many of the big, large urban school districts were in fact opting in. And I worry for those children whose parents don't have a loud enough voice to push back.
When one is in government, whether the state legislature or Congress, or even being governor, Governor Pritzker didn't run so that he could be the COVID governor. No, and so my point is that issues come up that are unanticipated. So if you would, what do you bring to the table as far as your own values, your own education? So we would have an understanding of how you would process the various issues that come up that maybe we've not even heard about, to the extent that you're for free speech, for government, more government. Give us a bit of your governing philosophy, if you would.
Well, certainly as a Republican and a conservative, I do believe in limited government and individual freedoms and success. I think we need to lean back on that great document in our Constitution, which has laid out pretty clearly how our country should be run and how the people should be in charge of our government. So certainly most of my decisions are going to fall back on that. And I do think that we need some bravery in our capitals, Republicans who get elected by the people to be able to stand in that gap and fight for what is actually common sense legislation, but also constitutional legislation. And so my work experiences, I think, are an opportunity for me to rely on, being a parent or being an educator, or owning my own small business, working in my community to lift up those who are less fortunate, and having those experiences and allowing my prior relationships and conversations to sort of drive my goal of having the right people at the table. Being an educator, I'm forever a student, so I do want to hear all sides of the issue. I want to make an informed decision. Unfortunately, I think in our state house, we are finding legislators are having to vote very quickly on bills and legislation that is often reworked or scrapped or put up in the dark of night when you have limited time to be able to read the legislation. So I intend to be very thoughtful. I intend to be, very trustworthy and listen to my constituents. The 88th House District incorporates a lot of small towns, as I said, a lot of rural communities, has large ag industry, a lot of small businesses. So I think that voters are really wanting someone that's going to show up and listen to their concerns and go and advocate for them in Springfield. And that's my commitment.
Dan Calkins is the current State House Republican, and you're looking to replace him, and he has endorsed you for the seat. That said, the Republicans are, well, let me say it this way. The Democrats control both the House and Senate in the Illinois State Legislature with overwhelming numbers, so that currently the Republicans have virtually no power to do anything. They can discuss the issues, but if the Democrats want to ignore everything they say, they can do that and pass legislation without them, and frequently do. Why would you, what's your motivation, you think, to go into the legislature? Because here we are in August of 2023. You're talking about running for election in November of 2024. So we're like, 15 months away until the election. You're going to have to raise a lot of money. You're going to have to make a lot of speeches, be away from your family. It is a grueling job to be a candidate for office. So I appreciate candidates doing this. It's not easy, and we don't have democracy without elections. We don't have elections without candidates. But what's your motivation, given the realities that Chicago, over the better part of the last 20 years, has ruled Springfield with Republicans having very little input?
Well, for sure, my family is my motivation, like so many that I am trying to continue to keep engaged in this democratic process. We have spent a lot of time on the trail as a family. I've spent a lot of time by myself as a candidate, going out and traveling the various parts of the districts. And I refuse to give up hope. And I think that that's what so many Illinoisans are looking for, in that they want to know that there are people that are going to stay in this fight. They're going to continue to advocate for common sense legislation. And I think one of my goals is to continue to unify the Republican Party. I think that we have had a rough couple of years, some tough losses in 2024. There was no red wave, but I do know that the people still believe in our country, in our great state of Illinois, and they're looking to people to go and stay in the fight. I mean, I meet people every single day that really don't have time to pay attention to what's going on in the legislation. They're working, they're providing for their families, they're, trying to stay engaged in their own small town life. And really that's important and that's critical, and that's what keeps our state moving. So it's my job to go out and introduce myself, gain people's trust, listen, and know that they can believe in me and going to the Capitol and advocating for them. I mean, we have a great group of Republicans that are in the state house. We need to grow that number. The Republican Party needs to start winning again. But what we need to do is go out and change the hearts and minds of voters. I mean, we have to talk to independents. We have to talk to Democrats who are living in this same state. They're my neighbors. They're just across town. They're just a few towns north. They're struggling. We've got, economic issues. We've got safety issues. We've got education issues. And as an elected official, I know that it's my responsibility to go and represent the people because they don't have the time or the energy to do that. But as I'm going out and meeting people, I am begging them to stay engaged. You need to know who your elected officials are. You need to know what's going on in your local towns and village meetings. You need to show up at your school board meetings if you have a concern. If we are in fact going to return to a constitutional republic that's run by the people, we can't give up. And that's what gets me out of bed every morning. I hope I'm setting a good example for my children that we've got to participate. We've got to stand up for what's right. And as a conservative, I really just am trying to engage people and trying to tell them that we're on the right side of issues. And I think that some of that bravery needs to come from some of my colleagues and some of the other elected officials too, and that we have to take our messaging on the road. We have to start showing up in uncomfortable or unusual places and just talk about our message and our hope for turning this state around.
One of the advantages of having you running already 15 months before the election is that you, as you just discussed, you're hearing from the voters. What are you hearing? Because it's kind of an unofficial poll, but when to go out and just talk to people and they share their thoughts, what are their concerns, and are there any issues that they're bringing to your attention that you're being educated on? Because a lot of times when you run for office, you hear things that you weren't aware of. So what are you hearing from the voters?
Yeah, I think the number one issue for people is the economy. As I'm going out and talking to people, their earned dollars are going not as far. Costs are up for groceries, for housing, for gasoline, for taxes. Here in Illinois, we obviously always have a tax burden that's higher than just about anywhere else in the country. And so that is probably the number one issue. I'd also say I talk to a lot of small businesses and a lot of farmers, and they can't find workers. We have had a society where for the last couple of years, a lot of people have become reliant on the government. And now we need to get people back to work, and we need to start talking to people about the value of work and how we need a succession plan in a lot of these trades and, the ag industry. There are people that are looking for truck drivers to haul grain out at the end of the season. And so, I think that those are probably the two biggest issues. I'd probably say the third one is, the open border, which seems like an unusual conversation for, a central state in the country like Illinois, but we are a sanctuary state, and Chicago is a sanctuary city, and a lot of those migrants are coming to Chicago and then trickling down into some of our smaller towns and communities. And a lot of our municipalities and elected officials are worried about the strain that that's going to put on their budgets and on their resources. So that has also been a conversation that's being had, with people I meet in the district. But I think that I like to take each voter individually. What is important to you? Are you trying to stay here because you want to be here for your grandparents? Are you a fourth generation farmer? Are you wanting, you love your home, you've built your dream home, you want to stay here, you love your neighborhood, you love small town way of life and feeling safe. And so I think that all of those things are going to be important to me when I go to Springfield and try and have conversations being in the super minority. You laid it out very clearly. The party in power of the Democrats, they don't need our votes. But it's time we start talking to those who have elected those Democrats and talking about what legislation they are pushing and shining a spotlight on bad policy. I think that those elected officials need to be held to account also. They don't just get to make a vote in the dark of night and then go back to their home districts and, talk like everything is rosy.
When you bring up the border, and you're right, it seems odd to think that here in central Illinois, which is a centrally located, as you say, state, that we would be talking about the immigration crisis at the border. But we see in the news what's happening with New York now, what's happening to cities across the country. And it's not just along the Arizona and Texas communities anymore, it's everywhere. In fact, I will tell people, if they haven't heard, Representative Hammond, who is a member of the Republican Party, brought up that because, as you mentioned, the sanctuary status, the governor had a program to pay for health care for these illegal immigrants, and where he had budgeted $200 million, the reality is in this current fiscal year, the state has just started July 1, it's going to be close to $1 billion that Illinois taxpayers are going to be paying to pay for health care for these illegal immigrants. And I wonder how many families in the state of Illinois, not just in the 88th district, are struggling to make their own payments for their health care or on their credit cards and to manage their own finances. Recently, within the United States, for the first time in history, credit card debt has gone up over $1 trillion. And that speaks to the inflation, where people are struggling to, as you mentioned earlier, to buy groceries, to make their car payments. Everything is going up. Their credit card debt's going up. Many are struggling with their school loans, and then the taxes keep going up on property taxes, which property taxes are not, unlike income tax, tied to your ability to afford to pay for your own home anymore. You could pay the mortgage off, and you're still left with a property tax bill that is as high as a mortgage in some cases. So I could just well imagine these are all issues you probably hear from across the 88th district as you talk to people. Are there any issues that really surprised you, or if not that, then I know some of the district, a lot of your district is agriculture. If you had anything you wanted to add on agriculture, why don't you throw that in as well?
Well, I think that, nothing surprises me. I'm always grateful when people do want to bend my ear. I think people appreciate when candidates and elected officials show up in places that aren't expected, whether that's, a community event or a farm bureau meeting or, an ethnic organization or a church. And people like to be able to see you and know that you are approachable. I mean, when we remember that we are elected officials serving the people, it's important that we continue to be there for the people and we continue to be accessible. The state of Illinois has a transparency problem. And in this day and age, I really don't think there's any excuse for that. People can get around. We can use technology like this. We can use social media. And I do think Republicans have a responsibility to tell the voters what they're up against. If you're on the House floor at 2 a.m., and you've got a break, you have an opportunity to step outside and do a live video and talk about how your hands are tied on this vote. There are good things in the bill. There are bad things in the bill. It's so large that you're doing the best you can. You've heard them and you're voting for their best interests. But a lot of times it just doesn't matter. And so I think we need to get back to good governance also. We did watch at the federal level, some small minority groups that were trying to push back on Speaker McCarthy to just have some good governance in the Capitol. And so I'd like to see that effort done as well, because I think that's what the voters want. I mean, they don't want to be fooled. They don't want to be back-ended into something. And it's frustrating for legislators as well. So the ability to go there, even being in the super minority, and kind of shine a spotlight on what is bad policy or what is not good for the people is certainly a goal of mine. You mentioned the strong ag industry in the 88th House District, and you're absolutely right. I have attended a handful of the 4 counties farm bureau meetings. Obviously, the carbon sequestration pipeline is a big conversation that's coming up now. Do have the Clinton power plant in the 88th district, so I attended their open house. I was surprised to learn that 52% of the state's electricity comes from nuclear power, and so of course, we had a bipartisan passage of eliminating the moratorium on nuclear power plants. The veto has come through from the governor. So energy efficiency is a big conversation here in our state as well. We're facing the hottest week I think we felt coming down. And, the reality is going to hit when people can't come home and turn on their air because, our electric grids are overworked or our renewable fuels are not doing the job they need to. So, I have concerns about the governor and the legislature's plan for energy consumption and production here in the state of Illinois as well. And I think that's a reality that many people haven't quite felt just yet. But, when we have the hottest of hot and the coldest of cold right here in Illinois, we're going to need to rely on some of those fossil fuel industries and the nuclear industry as well. And I'm all for a balanced plan, but sometimes it's hard when it feels like the goal line is just being changed from year to year.
Yeah, I mean, it's because some people would be watching this 6 months or 8 months from now. We'll point out that as we tape this in August of 2023, this week, the heat index is going to be up to around 112 degrees or so. And I've pointed out to people that it's not just a question when we have all these efforts to mandate wind and solar, that those are not what we call reliable. The wind doesn't always blow, and the sun obviously doesn't shine at night. So those sources of electricity cause your electric bill to go up. And the other thing is, if the electricity goes out in heat like this, it's not just a question of sweating. I mean, older citizens will literally die. And we know we've seen this happen before. In 1995, up in Chicago, in a similar heat wave, we had over 700 people die because they couldn't afford their air conditioning, or they just didn't have it. So these are life and death matters. They're not just esoteric issues as far as. Plus, of course, we can't run an economy, one, if the electricity isn't always on, and two, if we price our electricity in Illinois so expensively that we have businesses leaving the state because they can't run a manufacturing plant being competitive. And we've seen the headquarters of Caterpillar leave the state. We've seen Boeing, the headquarters, leave the state. We've seen something like 100,000 people every year for the last several years leaving Illinois because of high taxes. So obviously these public policies, it used to be, I think, that citizens could kind of turn their back on government and ignore it, and the only people that really paid attention were people like me who were policy geeks. But now it's right front and center. It's your ability to pay your mortgage, your tax bill, your credit card bill, and the whole everything else, and then wonder about whether your kids are going to be told things of a sexual nature that you wish they didn't know until at least they were maybe 12 or 12 years old or more. So let me do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, people have to stay engaged, and they have to pay attention. It's more critical now than ever. And in a state like Illinois, I mean, our governor has made it no secret that he's looking for us to become the most progressive state in the nation. And I think, being in central Illinois and thinking about not only my family, but the voters of the 88th district, we feel like we're under the thumb of the Chicago politics. I mean, the numbers are not in our favor. When you look at statewide maps and election results, there is a very dense blue, dark blue pocket in Chicago, and it's creeping out into the suburbs, and it's creeping into other places in the state like Champaign-Urbana and down towards East St. Louis, sort of those urban cores. But central Illinoisans and our conservative values are on the right side of things, and we just need to continue to grow our network. We need to continue to grow our party up into areas that wouldn't be traditionally loud, if you will. They're still red, and I think that it's a responsibility of all of us to kind of continue to talk about what the issues are, talk with our neighbors, re-engage people. I mean, you asked me one of the issues that's been surprising, and sometimes for me, it's the empathy, or the lack of empathy, I should say, that people are just not engaged. I mean, they feel disconnected. They feel like their vote might not count, and that we're in a state that the super minority is never going to make a change. So I refuse to give up hope. There are so many of us that do need to come together. Like I said, our party needs to come together as well. And we need to be talking about the issues all year long. The Democratic Party never stops. They never stop growing their party. They never stop trying to bring people in to their party, but they're on the wrong side of a lot of issues. I mean, one of the most recent pieces of legislation that has been particularly painful for me was the legislation against pregnancy resource centers. We are continuing to become a pro-abortion state. And for me personally, that's not acceptable. And I think to the majority of Illinoisans, it's not either. So, we have to continue to speak up. We have to continue to advocate for things that are important to us. And I need everyone to come along with us.
Regan Deering, we could talk, you and I, for a lot longer, but we won't do that. But maybe we can follow up with you as the election goes on. Hopefully the viewers now have a pretty good idea, at least of where you're coming from on a number of issues. If before we close out, do you have a campaign website that if people wanted to read more?
Yes, it's reganforillinois.com. We have lots of information about how you can get engaged in our campaign. We're always looking for volunteers to continue to go out and spread our message about conservative values and my representation for all in the 88th House District. There are some issue buttons there as well. We didn't cover it all today. But I do thank you for having me on and look forward to meeting people out on the trail.
By the way, is it Regan, FOR, Illinois?
Yes.
Not the number 4,
Yes.
as some people do. Okay. ReganForIllinois.com. Regan Deering, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Terry.
Take care.